episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a modern campaign agency dedicated to using data-driven grassroots organising to build winning campaigns and make the world a better place. Whether you're in business, issue-based campaigns, or an organisation driving change in your local community, Dunn Street develops strategies to overcome challenges by connecting people that share the same values and organises them to achieve goals from the ground up. To find out how Dunn Street can partner with you and your organisation, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Welcome to part 2 of our Kevin McKenna podcast. We recorded this all at the same time, but the podcast was so goddamn long, I decided to chop it up into 2 parts. Earlier in the week, we put up the part of the podcast where we talked about Scottish politics, Scotland's move towards independence, Scottish culture, journalism, all that kind of stuff. Today's episode is, as I joked about it last week, is really basically for my immediate family and anyone who supports the Celtic Football Club. So we talk about sectarianism in Scotland and the culture and the underbelly and the undercurrents that sectarianism forms in Scottish society, and then we spend most of the time talking about the Celtic Football Club. Kevin has been a Scottish sports writer for quite some time, and it's just amazing getting a lot of his thoughts on the club, both from a journalist's perspective, but also from the fans' perspective at the same time. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Don't forget to retweet this episode or share it on all of your various different social media platforms, and to make sure that you follow Socially Democratic through our Dunn Street social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So let's get to the second part of the episode with journalist Kevin McKenna. Okay, welcome back to the second part of the podcast with Kevin McKenna. Let's talk about sectarianism. We sort of touched on it a little bit earlier in the part 1 of the episodes, but I just sort of wanted to get your for you to give a bit of context for Australian listeners about this undercurrent of sectarianism that exists in Scottish culture, and give some context about the sort of the religious and cultural divides that exist, particularly in the west of Scotland, and then we can sort of move into how it's been a social problem for Scotland for a long time.
Yeah. So Scotland is portrayed by many and by a lot of people within as having deep-rooted issues with religious sectarianism, principally between Catholics and Protestants. This is something that it's a difficult concept for people who are Muslim or Hindu or Jewish to grasp, because all they see is 2 factions of the universal Christian religion, who are divided by about 2%, by about 4 books in the Bible, and they cannot understand that. And when you boil it down to that, why is there? And I suppose it is because it's political. It's cultural. It's become political, cultural, and social. It's not just religious. And it started with the Protestant Reformation, which was one of the countries where the fledgling ideas of the Reformation came to fruition was Scotland, and for good reason, because the Catholic Church was corrupt. And the irony that tickles me is that if I had been around in the 16th century in Scotland, I'd have been burning churches as well.
Yeah.
Until relatively recently, maybe 100 years ago, any kind of vestiges of Catholicism were treated with suspicion and persecution, and a lot of it was, you could understand, because such were the malpractice, malfeasance, of the Catholic Church and priests and bishops up until and including the 16th century, 17th century, that, the new society didn't want anything to do with it. So when the Irish Catholics began to flood into the country at the end of the 19th century, fleeing famine and persecution in their own country, there was I suppose the field was set for potentially pretty serious civil disorder. Because not only were they bringing the old hated faith with them, but they were seen as an alien race. They were portrayed as being not just poor, but dirty, ignorant, criminal underclass, if you like. The fact that within 4 or 5, there's two ways of looking at this. You can say, yeah, this sectarianism is still a blight in Scottish society, and a curse in both our houses. Or you can look at it and say, well, actually, given that all those conditions existed for serious civil disorder, the fact that within 4 or 5 generations hasn't happened in Scotland, and that the downtrodden Irish Catholic underclass, which came here in rags, came to Scotland in rags less than 100, 120 years ago, that now they have fully taken their place at the top of Scottish society. They're well represented in politics, in business, in the media. So if there has been a lot of sectarianism and anti-Catholicism, it's not been very successful. So you still see the manifestations of it, which are like orange walks, and there are still assaults. There are still people being nasty to each other and saying bad things, and talking and saying bad things about the Pope, and King Billy, Fenians, Orangemen. No one ever died, or no. We haven't had. Actually, it's wrong to say no one ever died. There have been casualties of this, but
because it got pretty bad in the 90s. Remember, I'm just trying to think of what was the genesis of nil by mouth.
Yeah, there was that. There was a poor lad who was killed walking past a Rangers pub, or walking past a pub in Bridgeton, which is a part of Glasgow where a lot of Rangers fans are. Yeah, but you can't, you can't portray entire supports with that. And the other thing that makes me queasy is that so Rangers have got a large, well, their main kind of religious influence amongst their supporters is Protestant, and with Celtic it's Irish Catholic, and that's tribal. But there are dozens of big city rivalries all over the world. This one happens to be defined by faith and culture. In Buenos Aires, where you've got Boca Juniors and River Plate, it's based on its class. In other areas, it's race. The manifestations of these big rivalries are usually quite nasty. They look nasty to people who are not part of them, because football fans, they tend to be working class, no nonsense, and they want to humiliate their rivals, because that's what football rivalries are all about. The vast majority of people park those rivalries within a few hours of a game finishing. But in Scotland, there's a tendency to punish ourselves, to say that this is terrible in the 21st century that we still have this. But there's a more sinister aspect to this, and this is something I've thought about over several years. That there's, in my opinion, there's a kind of liberal self-appointed elite in Scotland who hate all religion or hate Christianity, and so they pretend to be upset by this tribalism and this sectarianism, as they call it, and so they jump on bandwagons as a means of getting rid of all manifestations of religion or the hated Christian faith from Scottish society. And I think a lot of that is driving like media coverage and the overemphasis of sectarian violence. What you do have is that you have, if you to do a postcode analysis of the areas where sectarian violence or sectarianism exists in Glasgow, you would find that a disproportionate amount of it comes from the poorest areas. Now, I'm not saying that intolerance is confined solely to deprived areas, but these are the areas that it feeds on, because there's deeper problems there. You know, there is poverty on a scale that most of the people in the chattering classes will never encounter, would never even recognise. We're talking, in some parts of Glasgow, third world poverty. We're talking about, in Glasgow, there being a 7-mile stretch where for an adult male loses 20 to 25 years of his life expectancy because of a deep-rooted pattern of inequalities. And it's too easy for the liberal elites to talk about sectarianism because it's easy to identify, everybody hates it, they kind of wring their hands and talk loftily about it, virtue signalling, isn't this terrible? And it's not nice, it's not terrible. What is terrible is the vast inequality and the gap between rich and poor and the disproportionate influence of the elites that still happen in Scotland. But those things take, decades to solve, and politicians don't like areas that take decades to solve because they might not be around to claim the credit. If they to start something, if they really wanted to do something about this, they would have to institute something right now, which might take 25, 30 years, which means that they won't be there to claim the credit, and politicians like to claim the credit.
Tom Devine, who's an academic in Scotland, I remember when Neil Lennon was in his first stint at Celtic, both as a player and then in management, and there was a whole bunch of things that had happened. It seems to be that every time Celtic and Rangers kick off in some way, then that's when the debate about sectarianism starts to really come to the fore in the media. And Tom Devine had sort of talked about, I think he might have even had undertaken some academic research and said that it wasn't actually, sectarianism isn't, okay, we can call it sectarianism, but he was arguing that actually it is a discrimination against the Irish Catholic diaspora living in predominantly the west of Scotland. Now, you did say at the top of this subject that the progression of those communities now are leaders in media, government, business, sport, culture. But he was saying, he made the argument that there is still biases in Scottish culture towards that community. So it's not that both Protestant or Catholic communities in Scotland are suffering against each other, but there is still prejudice mainly directed at the minority Catholic community in Scotland. Is he a part of that sort of chattering class in some ways?
No. Tom's actually, he's actually conducted very, very recent research which says that, there has been discrimination against the Irish population in Glasgow and Scotland, but that round about 2000, 2001, the Irish diaspora, the descendants of the Irish diaspora finally reached wages parity with the rest of Scotland. And his most recent research has suggested that the anti-Catholicism is almost extinct if you look at certain indicators in employment, in crime statistics, in health statistics, in economic purchasing power. The hard data suggests that discrimination is at the point of extinction. Discrimination against Irish Catholics is at the point of extinction. And you can't argue against this hard data.
No, not at all.
On the street, there are parts of Glasgow which probably get a disproportionate number of orange marches, orange parades, and so they would tell a different story because they're seeing this kind of masculine, vehement, macho Protestantism, preening Protestantism during the marching season between what could be May to August, September. And if you live in those neighbourhoods, you could be forgiven for thinking, well,
Yeah, where's your data?
and I get that, and there have been some bad incidents, including a priest being spat upon outside his own church. And there has been an issue about not stopping these parades, because I don't think you can stop them. You can't, you can't stop people celebrating their traditions in the 21st century. But there is an issue about rerouting some of these marches. Mm-hmm. But the hard data would suggest that but we're reaching a point where the traditional manifestations of anti-Catholicism we're at the point of extinction. But ironically, I think there is a greater hostility towards not the Catholic Church, but Catholic or traditional Christian beliefs by the political classes, who are stealthily, there's a renewed campaign to get rid of Catholic schools, and to get the Catholic Church, Catholic priests to officiate at same-sex weddings, marriages. The Catholic Church would say that that's not discriminatory because same-sex marriages don't give you any more human rights than civil partnerships, which is true. It's a matter of belief, and their belief doesn't impinge on the human rights, social rights of anybody else. And I think the biggest danger to Catholicism, ironically, comes from people in those parties, high up in those parties, who would be the first to pretend to be outraged against discrimination a generation ago or even now. But it's a kind of it's a more subtle thing. Far easier to blame working class Orangemen with their orange sashes and talking about kicking the Pope.
Yeah.
They're the kind of convenient patsies for something that I think is a lot more sinister than that.
Speaking of the Pope, let's talk about Celtic. For those who are still listening to this episode, and as I said before, it mostly is my family, but those who are and unfamiliar with the Celtic Football Club, how would you best describe the Celtic Football Club? And I want to quote, and I think it was Graham Spears, and I remember reading this article at the airport on the way back from Seville, and I was flying from Seville in 2003 with my brother back to Glasgow, actually, to try and get tickets for the Kilmarnock game, for the last game of the season. And we bought all the papers, the Scotsman, the Herald, the lot. We had it all. Even though we lost, we still bought all the papers, right? And I think he wrote and he said that it is undisputed now that Celtic is a sporting and cultural phenomenon, which I thought in some ways kind of felt, certainly at that time for me, summed up that club. How would you best describe the Celtic Football Club?
Well, Celtic now market this, the phrase, the mission statement that they are more than just a club. And they want that to mean that the Celtic are moved by values, deep-rooted values that go beyond mere football and making money, because we were started to raise funds for the poor Irish immigrants that were pouring in the late 19th century, and that we care, we are on the side of the weak, that we are we are the downtrodden, we are of the people, we stand up for the economically oppressed, if you like, and that these are more important than just winning, or of equal importance, and that sets us aside from all these other clubs who are attached to capitalism, pure capitalism, and certainly not those nasty Rangers people. And yeah, most fans, we want that to be the case, because to us, Celtic is more than just a football club, because they were a light in the darkness for thousands of families who were encountering the whole range, the whole pattern of economic deprivation and discrimination in Glasgow. And Celtic was founded, and every Saturday when they played, they represented their aspirations, their hopes. They were, even though within 10 years the kind of charitable angle had been replaced by the need to win, that was okay by the fans, because what was the point if you weren't winning? Celtic winning when they were being defeated in the workplace and in their neighbourhoods 6 days of the week. Celtic winning on the Saturday seemed to make it worthwhile, and if you like, was a possibility of things to come, of better days to come. The Irish knew, lots of people in the Irish community were beginning the journey to make lives better for themselves, and that the Irish, like the Scots, are a very redoubtable, hardy race. Things wouldn't remain like that forever. No point in greeting about it. We'll just go on with it. So Celtic was their way out of the darkness, and that's been handed down through every generation. And it's never been watered down. It's not really been diluted. I mean, my children are as fervent about Celtic as I was, as my dad was, and it's because it carries those values that they all get told why Celtic was founded, and what it means.
Distance as well. I mean,
yeah.
I was born and raised in this country, and I'm a first-generation Australian, but my nephews and nieces are second-generation Australian, and they are just as passionate and driven about this football team that is literally on the other side of the world. And for some of them, they've yet to lay their eyes on Celtic Park.
I mean, a lot of it's very romantic. It's a lovely story. Not many clubs have got that. Have got that story at their foundation. Quite literally being raised up to help the poorest in society. And although their roots are in Irish Catholicism, very clearly at the outset ditching any attempts at being exclusively Catholic. And so that resonates. Those are universal values which we see played out in literature, in film, in art, which has driven all artistic output. So they've been favoured with a beautiful birth, if you like. And it's a story easily told and easily recognised. And you add into that the iconic nature of the green and white hoops, which are instantly recognisable wherever they play. And then you've got the entire Irish songbook, which comes with it. And you've got the later struggles in Northern Ireland against the British state. So you've got republicanism, nationalism, Irish culture and identity, working class culture and identity, anti-elitism, making partnerships with other left-wing and anti-capitalist movements and clubs throughout the world, as well as this beautiful birth and those iconic green and white hoops. So it's quite an intoxicating mix. What bothers me, though, if I'm looking for the cloud again, is that Celtic, the people who run Celtic now, they do trade on the more than just a club slogan. But in recent years, that's just palpably been nonsense. It emerged that they refused to pay the living wage, the basic living wage, to their poorest paid employees. And eventually they were forced against their will to agree to it. But when they did so, the board brought all of these employees in without any representation, I hasten to add, and I know this for a fact because I know some of them personally, and said, right, okay, we've decided that we will pay you the living wage, but we're going to take away the discretionary bonus that you've been getting for the last 10 years. That's not the practice of a special club or a club like no other. That's a club that's just like every other capitalist enterprise. They're currently three of their main sponsors are online betting firms, and I've got a major problem with that because I think online betting firms are predators of the people who give Celtic in the main their support. They prey on economically fragile and vulnerable people wherever they can find them. In the poorest areas and the poorest streets in Scotland, these online betting companies and their brothers and sisters in the betting industry, their shops proliferate. They target mainly working class men at their most fragile moments when they're watching their team on television, having a couple of drinks, with an experience in the euphoria of their team maybe just scoring a goal. With a flick of a finger, one click, they can bet money, £10, £15, £20. It's like crack cocaine. Yeah,
the betting culture in the UK, I think, is a lot stronger than it is in Australia, and it's pretty big in Australia as well.
Yeah. I've been reading all about the Crown Casino shenanigans.
Yeah, that's right. Your first memory of Celtic?
January 1969, 5-0 against Hearts.
Who scored?
I can't remember. John, I think John Hughes got a couple. John Hughes, Bobby Lennox. But it was just seeing the hoops because I was 5 or 6 at the time, and your entire childhood, from as far back as you can remember being a child, you've been told about this Celtic team. Celtic play a massive part in your family. You get to realise from the earliest age that this is something big, sacred in the lives of your family, including the women who might not go to the games, but they knew about it as well. And then there were the heroes, and there was your faith, family, and Celtic. So by the time you were being taken, it would be like a bar mitzvah. It's like a Holy Communion, your first communion. your first trip to Celtic Park, seeing them in the flesh, and that kind of feeling never leaves you.
23rd of August 1986, Celtic 1, Aberdeen 1 was my very first game.
Oh, I see. That's just after we'd won the league at Love Street.
And then, in fact, we were over there for a fair bit. That was the first time I went back to Scotland. No, actually, I was there when I was really quite young, but I don't remember that. But I was 11 at that time. And we led the league quite
Until
handsomely
Christmas.
that season, yeah. And then it just all fell in a heap.
We wouldn't spend the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Graham Souness's first season.
And that really began.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of a false dawn because we won the next season, the centenary season, which I think papered over some cracks.
Well, again, I'm talking about earlier about the incompetence at the top of Scottish society that can quite often strangle good ideas and good people and gifts. But the Celtic board, for much of its existence, was full of very, very incompetent people, and there were a lot of questions over where the money was going, because it certainly wasn't being invested in the team or the stadium. But they were having the biggest attendances in the UK for 10, 15 years. And yeah, the current board is far more competent. But if you're asking me, do we still adhere to the original values? And I would say no.
They have done certain, as a counter argument to that, and I do note the stuff about the living wage, and I completely, as a former trade union organiser, I completely agree with you. When I read about that at the time, I was, pretty pissed off. But they have, in recent years, tried to beef up the sort of the charitable side of the club.
You're right, I should say that. The Celtic Foundation, the Celtic Charity Foundation, under the stewardship of, the very fine stewardship of Tony Hamilton,
who I've interviewed for a podcast.
Tony's a good man.
Many years ago.
He's a good man. So yeah, a lot of work goes into the Celtic Charity Foundation, and it does loads of work. In fact, Tony phoned me just before I came out here about a matter to do with the charitable foundation, and he's constantly on the lookout for causes that can benefit. So yeah, I should say that. I suppose I would say that there's a lot of Tories on that Celtic board. And, and there are people on that board and you think, what are they there for?
When you were at the Celtic View, were you there during the old board?
Yeah.
And how close to the campaign to have them flipped out and Fergus coming in, was your tenure?
No, I'd gone, but one of my successors, Andrew Smith, who's now, in fact, I think Andrew's still a sports journalist at The Scotsman, but he also stood as a Green Party candidate in council elections. But Andrew was there at that time, and Andrew was sacked by the old board because he, unknown to them, he managed to put out a message in the official club publication criticising his own employees and backing Fergus McCann, and of course he managed to get that in before, or actually. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he'd written something. He might have written something for another publication criticising the old board. But of course he was reinstated as soon as they were ditched and Fergus McCann, the saviour of the modern Celtic, came in.
And a man that I think, and look, I know we all remember the sort of the history of Fergus, controversial character. After we stopped the league flag raising ceremony for the next season, got booed because of what happened with Wim Jansen and all that kind of stuff. And I remember at the time thinking, this guy's a legend.
Oh, of course. A lot of Celtic fans who booed him then have had cause to regret it. A lot of again, there was a PR struggle going on. Fergus McCann had he'd fallen out with one or two of his backers, or those who had helped get rid of the old board, including one or two individuals who felt that they were due a place on the board as of right, simply because they'd campaigned, whereas Fergus, having committed more than half his personal fortune, no guarantee he was going to get any of it back, was looking for a certain amount of money up front from these rich backers if they wanted a seat on the board. He simply wanted to see evidence that they were in it for as much as he was. So some of these individuals then used the press, Daily Record among others, to slaughter Fergus for their own ends, and also because their ambition had been stunted. And there was a narrative that Fergus should step aside because he didn't know what he was doing, and that Rangers were continuing to win, and he should be splashing cash right now on, massive investment in the playing squad. Whereas Fergus said, well, look, it wouldn't be ideal if Rangers win 10 in a row, but my main aim here is to ensure that Celtic still exist, and crucially that we continue to pay our bills, and that we're solvent, and we don't go into administration, we don't get liquidated. And so he took all those who felt that he was holding them back, that as soon as he'd saved them, he should move aside, let other people in, spend big money again that they didn't have, and stop Rangers winning 10 in a row. But he did stop Rangers winning 10 in a row. And the reason why Celtic are going through a golden period in their history right now and breaking all sorts of records, and the reason why they're far and away the best run and richest club in Scotland, and one of the best run and richest in the UK, is because of the foundations that he put in. And it's because he resisted going down the path that Rangers, unfortunately, went down before 2011, when they were simply spending money they didn't have, cheating the tax man, and not paying bills. And it led to what happens to lots of other companies who can't pay their bills, and that's the legacy of Fergus McCann.
Coming back to Ferguson in a moment, do you think Rangers should have those titles stripped from them during that period?
Oh God. Well, there's clear evidence.
Yeah, right.
Of wrongdoing. There's also a narrative that says, well, what would be achieved if?
There's precedent in so many other different sports. Lance Armstrong lost all of his Tour de France titles. Melbourne Storm, the team that plays in the National Rugby League here in Australia, cheated the salary cap system. They won a number of national championships, lost those as well.
I agree. I want to believe that they should be stripped of them, and if they did, I'm not going to be unhappy. I can't lie. But morally, and I've written this, I've got to be consistent about this, and I've thought about it. Again, we say that in football, the relationship we talked about before about Celtic and their fans and what Celtic means to us. Rangers have the same relationship with their fans. It's a working class fan base. They've got there's a cultural and civic aspect to their fanaticism, their love. I mean, it is they love their club as much as we love ours. It stands for things that matter to them, and
they are the people. Evidently.
Well, let's just start singing "Follow, Follow," and so look, we get our love of Celtic through handed down memories. And I think that the current Rangers fans, and I know a few of them are friends of mine, they get their support for Rangers, and it's handed down to them. And it's almost like those memories those handed down memories almost act as a bridge over the malfeasance of the officers in charge. It wasn't the Rangers fans that put them down. It was low-level corruption, greed, and a lack of accountability. Should those fans and their ancestors, the memories, of generations going back, be punished when it's pettily taking away their titles, or saying, well, it's not the same club? Of course, it's the same club. They play in blue, they play in red and black socks, white shorts. They play at Ibrox. If Celtic really wanted them to go down, if Celtic wanted them to be stripped of their titles, the Celtic board could have moved. So could UEFA, so could the SFA, and made it happen. So Celtic are the richest, most powerful club in the country at the moment. They've got a seat at the top tables in Europe. They don't want it to happen. And there's a reason for that. One, whether we like it or not, and I don't like the old firm tagline, but as Peter Lawwell said, when Rangers went out of business and had to start again in the third division, we lost several £1 million a season. And no matter what any Celtic fan says, part of the way we define ourselves is through Rangers football. It's what we think of Rangers. And if people tell you differently, they're lying. You just look at all the Celtic fan websites and how many pages are taken up by discussing the other lot, their players. I mean, I know as much about the history of Rangers as I do of Celtic, and I know Rangers fans who know as much about the history of Celtic as Rangers, and I think that's true for both clubs.
Yeah, and the mere fact that you and I are talking about what is predominantly a Celtic part of the podcast,
I would not be, upset in the slightest, and I would think that they got what they bloody well deserved if they get their titles taken away. But then you think, well, do their fans deserve that?
There were, my only other sort of comment or question to put to you on this one is anecdotal. I mean, I don't live there, so my experience is fundamentally different to those who live in Scotland. But certainly a lot of my cousins sort of mentioned that they felt that there was a fresh air about the place whilst they were playing down in the third division. However, I think if you had a couple of beers with them, they'd say, I wouldn't mind when they come back, I'll look forward to those games. So maybe there's an imbalance in their theory. But they did say that they thought that they've not enjoyed that toxicity or, just that they would talk about the nervousness that would have in the week leading up to a Celtic Rangers clash.
Yeah, but it's bollocks. It's like, that's just bollocks. I've heard that said in Scotland a lot, and some of my own relatives have said it. But without that nervousness, that edge, where's the element of competition? If Rangers weren't here, Celtic will win the title from now until that comet with Earth's name on it hits us. Everyone knows that. What's the point in that? Yeah. There's no competition, there's no game. With Rangers, there is a possibility of competition, and that edge that you experience, and yet can be toxic. A week or so before an Old Firm game, a Celtic Rangers game, that's competition. That's what happens in Milan, it happens in Buenos Aires, it happens in Madrid, Barcelona, London, Manchester, Liverpool, and the rivalry is better for it, and the quality and the competitiveness is better for it.
Celtic's competition and place in Europe, I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I am incredibly frustrated as each season goes by, the gulf that exists between essentially the top teams in England, Spain, Italy, Germany and France. with the rest. And the notion of a European Champions League is a complete farce now. The old European Cup is well and truly dead.
It's just, I mean, again, you want to talk about a political analogy. Is there anything more purely capitalistic and corporate as the European Champions League?
Yeah.
There is nothing more unequal, and it's the last bastion of untrammeled, pure, corporate, untethered capitalism, which basically says the richest and the biggest will get richer and bigger, and those who are not will become poorer and less able. And any element of fairness, no. Anything that might detract or might diminish the riches, the income streams of the big clubs in those 5 leagues isn't allowed. And everyone saw it coming, and nobody was able to do anything about it. They could still do something about it. You know, you get club. I mean, look at Ajax. Ajax got to the semi-finals of the European Champions League last season. Outplayed Spurs over the 2 legs. How Spurs got into that final was how Spurs even got anywhere near the semi-final was just a joke. And yet Ajax are going to have to play a qualifier. Celtic are going to have to play 4. In recent seasons, the likes of Benfica won the European Cup twice, been in the final 5 times.
Yeah.
Anderlecht, big city club, big city at the centre of Europe, have to pre-qualify.
From a country where their national team is, you know, by all reports, one of the best teams in the world.
Yeah.
Porto, another team that actually did break the system and actually win it in 2004, treated as second-class citizens.
Yeah, and then, you know, the Turkish teams, Greek teams, all clubs who contributed to the golden age of European competition in the 60s, 70s and 80s, when there was uncertainty, which is the true element of competition. And where there was where gifts were evenly distributed. But now, because of these 4, France arguable, I mean, France is a joke in itself. I mean, only one French club has ever won a European Cup. That was Marseille, and there was a big question mark over corruption with that one. Only 2 other clubs have won any kind of European trophy. I mean, France are one of the most underachieving, incompetent football nations on earth. I mean, Paris Saint-Germain they won a European Cup Winners' Cup in 1996, and that's been it. Nowhere near anything.
Yeah, I was too polite by chucking them in that group. I should have left them out of it.
Yeah. Marseille.
I think St Etienne
got a final.
Yeah.
Marseille won the European Cup once, runners-up once. Lyon haven't even been in a European Cup final. Bordeaux haven't been in a European Cup final. You know, this is a football nation that hardly deserves. Scotland has got more European winners than France. Belgium, Holland, Portugal. But they are there at the top 5 because of the television money.
Is there a way back from this, or is this just going to become a
industrial action?
Yeah.
Industrial action solves everything.
Well, it kind of created it in the first place, because the Italian teams that cracked the shits in the first place, it said, we're not happy about the fact that it's only Juventus or AC Milan that's getting to play in the European Cup each year, and so we're putting pressure on your UEFA to change it up.
Well, basically, if you could have with social media and crowdfunding and instant crowds, you know, you can organise anything at 3 hours' notice these days. So I would have thought that people at Peter Lawwell, who's like one of the most shrewd football strategists in the game, and he's been making lots of alliances with these clubs like Ajax. I mean, the Ajax president, Van der Sar, used to be the Manchester United goalkeeper. He was lamenting the fact that a club with Celtic's history and Ajax's history don't automatically qualify. Well, what he said was that if you win the league and you have previously won European Cup, you should get in
straight away.
He's not arguing for a free pass for anybody who's ever won the league, or else Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa would be in there.
Yeah.
I would have thought that if they were really serious about altering this, and nothing makes the elites tremble more than industrial action. And industrial action would be they get together, the local federations, and they decide they're going to suspend professional football for, a wildcat strikes every so often until they listen, or else they simply say we're not participating. Now, of course, there are cost implications, there are income implications, but if they don't do something, they're going to be permanently excluded. So so Celtic are having to negotiate 4 qualifying rounds. Soon they'll be told, no, you're not even going to get in. We've created another competition for you, and there'll be no bridge to get in, no pyramid.
Which has been discussed now.
So Celtic and Ajax and Anderlecht and Benfica and Porto and Galatasaray, AEK Athens want to accept that, then fine, but they're doing that down their fans. But if they had come up with a strategy, and you can't tell me that they can't have some kind of strategy where they withdraw their labour one way or another, which might be non-participation for a year or so in European football. There's a slight precedent for that and Celtic benefited from it in 1968-69, where Celtic were drawn against Ferencváros, the Hungarian champions in the 68-69 European Cup, and then the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia happened, and Celtic took a principled stand and said we're not going to play against a Soviet bloc entity, and other clubs followed suit, and they had to redraw the first round, and the Soviets tried to force all the Eastern European teams to come out of the draw in 68-69, so Celtic ended up playing St Etienne instead.
That's right.
So that happened within days at a time when there was no such thing as mass communication, and it was on a point of principle. And we're getting to the stage where all these big, famous clubs with far more of a football hinterland than the likes of Paris Saint-Germain or Chelsea or Manchester City are concerned. These are just boutique clubs. Unless they're happy to be permanently locked out from there, then they're going to have to take guerrilla action. And as you and I know, nothing upsets the rich than a nice wee strike, properly organised.
That could be something I could do at Dunn Street, my business. The last couple of questions, because I know you've got things to do today. The Brendan Rodgers saga from last year and the reappointment of Neil Lennon. What are your thoughts?
Love Neil Lennon, delighted. Was never a great fan of Brendan Rodgers to begin with. If he was chocolate, he would eat himself. Those teeth kind of, it just resonated fakery from top to bottom. Yeah, we started playing decent football, and we won a couple of trebles, and you don't sniff at them. You got a lot of money to do it, and you got a hell of a lot of money to do it because the Celtic board, or Dermot Desmond, was thoroughly pissed off, allegedly because of the way Rangers celebrated by beating Celtic in penalties in the 2016 Scottish Cup semi-final. But Rodgers was always just going to see Celtic as a stepping stone, but all this badge kissing, I loved Celtic, it's always been my club, and then he's off like a thief in the night. There's nothing that would have prevented Brendan Rodgers seeing out the rest of the season. Three more months.
Right, yeah.
Now his justification was that Leicester City, what are Leicester City? We're holding his feet to the fire, saying, no, you have to come now. Oh, he's Brendan Rodgers. You know, when we're not talking about Manchester United or Liverpool or Barcelona here, we're talking about bloody Leicester City.
And I think they came out and refuted that statement anyway and said that we didn't put any pressure on Brendan Rodgers or his agent to sign before the close of the season.
They just says to him, yeah, I'm happy to come to you, but we're on the verge of making history here. This means a lot to these fans who have invested a lot of time, effort, emotion, money in this. Can you give me 3 months? I mean, most normal people's employment, they have to give 3 months' notice anyway.
Yeah.
But he left overnight, didn't even say farewell to the players or the staff that he worked with at Lennoxtown. And that was Rangers. Rangers had the best chance Rangers will ever get in stopping Celtic winning 10 in a row was last season in February when he went and Neil Lennon came back. And although Lennon would have wanted to change the style of play, he couldn't afford to start changing the style at that stage in the season. And that's when Rangers had an opportunity to stop this. And Brendan Rodgers gave them that opportunity.
Last couple of questions. Scott Brown, where does he fit in the pantheon of Celtic captains?
He's there.
We've only had 30 captains. I went back and checked.
Yeah. Okay. In terms of trophies won, he's up there.
Tenure as well. He's been there.
Yeah, he has. I'm the wrong person to ask about Scott Brown. I've never been. He's played his best football for the last 2 years, actually. But before then, I quite often thought he was in the team simply because he cost us £4 million. And he's got big personality and a big dressing room personality. And I think he's able to, probably able to intimidate or get his way even with incoming managers and coaching staff. And I think sometimes the way he conducts himself on the park is not becoming of a Celtic captain. It's easy to take the piss out of Rangers when you're on top of them and beating them 3-4-5-0, or when you know what they're going through. I just wouldn't. I wouldn't really be expecting a Celtic captain to be laughing in the face of opponents as they're getting sent off. Going up eyeball to eyeball with opponents after they've scored a goal. Do you need to? McNeil wouldn't have done it. Paul McStay wouldn't do it. Kenny Dalglish wouldn't have done it. Jock Stein wouldn't have done it. Alan Stubbs, Roy Aitken. These were all hard, big, competitive Celtic men. You don't go about your business. And if you just lose that, and it's too late now, fine. But great Celtic captain, and the trophies that we've won under his captaincy, his fitness levels, his sheer personality, his will to win, personal conduct, which is the big thing about being captain. On-field conduct, because off-field you can't criticise him. He leads an exemplary life away from the park. Of that there is no doubt. And he does good things away from the park. I cringe when I see him baiting or making fun of opposition players.
Being an Australian and following the Australian cricket team, certainly in the 1990s and 2000s, the Australian cricket team had a psychological edge over opposing sides. They backed it up with talent, but they got in the heads of their opponents, and I liked that. I don't like the current Australian cricket team, and a lot of Australians will agree with me on that. They think they're a bunch of dickheads, but that the 90s and 2000s team were a cut above the rest, and I think that they were winning games before they even walked on the pitch. And I saw a bit of Scott Brown in those tough games against Rangers.
I don't think that. But you see, you're talking about people like Ricky Ponting, or.
Well, Steve was the one
him, and then you've got Lillian Thompson of an earlier generation. I mean, they were supremely gifted sportsmen. They were amongst the best cricketers that have ever been. So they could back it up with pure talent.
Yeah.
But also a cricket match lasts, one game lasts like an entire best part of a week. You're out there from 10 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. And so psychological warfare is built into the fabric of cricket. You don't think
in football it is?
Nah, I don't think so. I think it's over quickly. You get too much to concentrate on. Yeah, of course there's a side that there's always going to be a bit of that. It's a loud game. Remember, there's lots of fans, so nothing is picked up, or most of what is said is probably you can't hear anyway. But it's no. I mean, even if you're even talking about Watt and Border, Ponting, Smith's never ever going to say anything again anyway after what happened to him last year. Yeah. He's going to be an angel on the park. Sledging, he will not do. Even if I like a bit. There's the old stories about sledging in cricket are great. Like Merv Hughes saying things that you probably couldn't repeat on a podcast like this. Great fun, but you always got the impression that there was respect, even amidst the sledging. There was respect. You during the 2005 Ashes series, you had England players going for pints with Australians. Now, okay. You would, if you're an Australian cricket fan, you say, "Well, that's Reem. We're not hard enough." Well, they were going to lose eventually, weren't they? Yeah, Australia. So I think it's different. I do think it's different. I think there was still, even despite all the sledging, there was still respect. And I think sometimes that Brown's conduct as captain on the field, on occasions, is something less than respectful of opponents.
Last question. This is going to be a tough one. I was going to say name your top 5, but if that's too many, then it's okay. You can shorten that list. But your favourite players that weren't Lisbon Lions that you've seen?
Dalglish, Kenny Dalglish, George Connolly, Charlie Nicholas. I've just always had a soft spot for Charlie. Henrik Larsson, Lubo, Moravchuk. That's me just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's a pretty good list.
Next week I might think of others, but yeah, those 5.
We spoke off air beforehand about Kieran Tierney being sold. Record transfer fee for Celtic to another club, 25 million. And Twitter, for those who were born from 1988 onwards, is in meltdown right now. For those seasoned Celtic supporters of our age, seen it all before. Jerry Seinfeld once said, "We're basically cheering for laundry."
Yeah. 25 million. A lot of money. I would be happier if I was more... if I had confidence that the Celtic board will give Neil Lennon the bulk of that money to spend over the next couple of seasons. I don't expect him to splurge at all in the transfer market in the last 3 weeks. But we're crying out for a left back, a proper left back. And I don't know how we spent £3 million on Bolly. I know it's early days, but he is not a £3 million player. Kieran Tierney, no, I'm not happy with Kieran Tierney. Celtic invested a lot of money in him from the age of 8. And yeah, of course they've got 25 million back. But Kieran Tierney gave you the impression that he was like the Green Brigade's representative on the field. He said as much.
And behaved as much.
Yeah, and at the end of games, he would grab a loudhailer and join in with the Green Brigade, clutching his jersey. And he left at the first opportunity. People should realise that. It's not that he had been the subject of lots of transfer rumours over many years and decided to go at 26, 27. And that happened to Kenny Dalglish. Dalglish left Celtic at 26 or 27. People compare it with Charlie Nicholas, but Charlie Nicholas was... Celtic were so desperate for the cash. Charlie Nicholas was basically was almost like packed into a car blindfolded and taken to a Glasgow city centre location where he was then told, sign here, you're an Arsenal player. But Kieran Tierney could have stayed 2 or 3 more years, been part of a potential 10 in a row, still only be 24. So, yeah, forgive me if I'm not, if I don't wish him all the best. I'd be looking at his agent situation. I understand that he changed agents in the last year or so. Yeah, all the chest beating. First opportunity he had, he was off.
On that note, it's been great having you on the podcast today. And from a personal standpoint, for many Celtic supporters that live outside of Britain and Europe, for that matter, our window into the football team that we love is through forms of media communication. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. After an important game or a trophy win, you want to read the papers the next day and consume that. And that's in the 1980s. All we had was the papers that got sent over, and then sort of the advent of the internet, when all of a sudden this opened up this world where we could read. Excellent writers like yourself and
Thank you.
Graham Spears.
Graham Spears is an old
Glenn
friend
Gibbons
of mine.
is another guy that I enjoyed reading.
Glenn died, sadly,
I didn't know
a few
that.
years ago.
No, that's tragic.
And yeah, Glenn was a fantastic writer.
And it just made the experience all the more enjoyable to read good quality journalism about the football team and broadly a sport that you loved. And
Hugh MacDonald is another really good writer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although he's gone to he's left the Daily Mail. Sorry, the Herald, and gone to the Daily Mail. And the other ones are Alan Patillo and the Scotsman.
I do.
Very good.
I don't read the Scotsman as much as I used to. I've subscribed to the Herald online for, I reckon, about a decade now.
Yeah, the Herald and the Scotsman's got a decent... The Scotsman's unfortunately dying a death because of the incompetence of its owners, which is a shame. But some of its sports writing is still good, and Big Alan is a good writer.
Well, we thank you very much for taking your time
No,
out
my
today
pleasure.
to come
Thank
on
you
the
for
show.
asking me.
And we wish you the best of luck when you head back.
Thank you.
And if you're ever back in
Hopefully
town.
make it in one piece.
Yeah, indeed. It's a long flight.
I'll be back to see Claire, my daughter, so yeah.
Would love to have you back on again.
Notice if we can discuss whether we get the 10 or not.
That's it. Cheers.
Right, all the best.